Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. This is a podcast where I read old books, sometimes fiction, sometimes non-fiction, in the most boring way I can, to try and help slow your spinning mind enough for you to fall asleep in the most natural way possible. The stresses of life often follow us to bed and keep us company, but I'm here to distract you from them and help you to drift away. But before you do fall asleep, if you find Sleepy Time Tales helpful and you would like to support me to keep it going out to you and thousands of your fellow insomniacs, please consider signing up on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. If monthly is a big ask, which I can understand, you can also put a tip in the tip jar in the Ko-Fi, which is linked in the show notes along with the Patreon. Or you can support Sleepy Time Tales by simply spreading the word. If you know someone who's struggling to get some sleep, just tell them where to find it. And that's enough of that. We're picking up with what is supposedly a story about railways, but is actually, for this episode, a very close examination of the industries of Birmingham. So snuggle down, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and listen closely as I lead you down the path to sleep. Return today to Rides on Railways by Sidney. In order to appreciate the independent character and quick inventive intelligence of the Birmingham mechanic, he should be visited at his own home. A system of small independent houses instead of lodgings prevails in this town, to the great advantage of the workmen. It is only within a very few years that the working classes have had, in a local school of design, means of instruction in the principles of taste and arts of drawing and modeling, while, until the patent laws are put upon a just foundation, their inventive faculties can never be fully developed. When the artisans of Birmingham have legislative recognition of their rights as inventors and free access to a first-rate school of design, their cunning hands will excel in beauty, as well as ingenuity, all previous triumphs. The wealthier classes have, from various causes, deteriorated within the last 60 years, while the workmen have improved within that time. Men who have realized fortunes no longer settle down in the neighborhood of their labors. They depart as far as possible from the smoke of manufactures and the bickerings of middle-class cliques, purchase estates, send their sons to the universities, and in a few years subside into country squires. Professional men, as soon as they have displayed eminent talent, emigrate to London, and the habit, now so prevalent in all manufacturing towns, of living in the suburbs, has sapped the prosperity of those literary and philosophical institutions and private reunions, which so much contributed to raise the tone of society during the latter half of the last century. The meetings of an old literary and philosophical society have been discontinued, and the newsroom was lately on the brink of dissolution. Instead of meeting to discuss points of art, science, and literature, the middle classes read the Times and Punch and consult the penny cyclopedia. The literary and scientific character which Birmingham acquired in the days when Bolton, Watt, Priestley, Darwin, Murdoch, and their friends met at the Birmingham Lunarian Society to discuss, to experiment, and to announce important discoveries, have passed away never to return, and we are not likely to see again any provincial town occupying so distinguished a position in the scientific world. The only sign of Birmingham's ancient literary preeminence is to be found in several weekly newspapers, conducted with talent and spirit far beyond average. It is an amusing fact that the sect to which Priestley belonged still trade on his reputation, and claim an intellectual superiority over the members of other persuasions, which they may once have possessed, but which has long been levelled up by the universal march of education. The richer members publish dull little books in bad English on abstruse subjects, and like Consuelo's prebendary have quartos in preparation, which never reach the press. In fact, the suburban system of residence and the excessive pretension of superiority by the pots over the kettles have almost destroyed society in Birmingham, although people meet occasionally at formal, expensive parties and are drawn together by sympathy in religion and politics. Nothing would induce an educated gentleman to live in Birmingham, except to make a living. Yet they are residing there, seldom seen out of their factories, men of the highest scientific and no mean literary attainments. There are a number of manufactories which, in addition to their commercial importance, present either in finished articles or in the process of manufacture much that will interest an intelligent traveller. Glass. Messrs. F&C Oslers of Broad Street have attained a very high reputation for their cut and ornamental, as well as the ordinary articles of flint glass. They have been especially successful in producing fine effects from prismatic arrangements. The gigantic chandeliers of great size, made for Ibrahim Pacha and the Nepalese prince, were the steps by which they achieved the lofty crystal fountain of an entirely original design, which forms one of the most novel and effective ornaments of the Crystal Palace. The manufactory as well as the showroom is open to the inspection of respectable strangers. Messrs. Rice and Harris are also extensive manufacturers of cut and coloured glass, and Messrs. Backus and Sons have been very successful in their imitations of Bohemian glass, both in form and colour. Messrs. Chance have acquired a worldwide reputation by supplying the largest quantity of crown glass in the shortest space of time for Paxton's Palace. These works, in which plate and every kind of crown glass is made, are situated at West Bromwich. The proprietors have benevolently and wisely made arrangements for the education of their workmen and their families, which are worthy of imitation in all those great factories where the plan which originated in Lancashire has not been already adopted. A letter of introduction will be required in order to view Messrs. Chance's establishment, of which we shall say more when noting the social state of the Birmingham operatives. Papier-mâché. Mrs. Jennings and Bettridge's works are so well known that it is only necessary to refer to them for the purpose of saying that in their showrooms some new application of the art which they have carried to such perfection is constantly to be found. Pianos, cradles, armchairs, indeed complete drawing-room suites, cornices, door-plates, and a variety of ornaments are displayed, in addition to the tea-trays and tea-chests, in which the art of japanning first became known to us. Although Messrs. Jennings & Co. have the largest establishment in Birmingham, there are several others who produce capital work. Among them may be named Mr. Thomas Lane and Messrs. McCallum and Hodgson, who both exhibited specimens of great merit at the last Birmingham Exhibition of Manufactures. But metals afford the great staple of employment in Birmingham, and we shall avail ourselves, in describing the leading trades and touching on the social position of the workmen, of the admirable letters on labour and the poor in Birmingham, which appeared in the Morning Chronicle in the course of 1850. Birmingham buttons. A Brummagem button is the old-fashioned nickname for a Birmingham workman. The changes of fashion and the advances of other manufactures have deprived that trade of its ancient preeminence over all other local pursuits. But the button trade, although not the same trade which made great fortunes in a previous generation, still employs 5,000 or 6,000 hands, of which one half are women and children. In the middle of the 18th century, a plain white metal button was made, which may occasionally be seen in remote rural districts, on the green coats of old yeomen, wearing hereditary leather breeches. At that period, the poorer classes wore coarse horn or wooden buttons, chiefly homemade, and the tailor made, as well as the clothes, buttons covered with cloth. By degrees, very handsome gilt buttons came into wear, and continued to employ many hands, while the blue coat, which figures in the portraits of our grandfathers, remained in fashion. In 1826, the Florentine, or covered button, now in almost universal use, which is manufactured by machinery with the aid of women and children, was introduced, and by 1829 the gilt button trade had been almost destroyed. The change produced great distress. Vast numbers of persons were thrown out of work, who could not at once turn to any other employment. In 1830, a deputation from the gilt button trade waited upon George IV and the principal nobility to solicit their patronage. The application succeeded. Coloured coats with metal buttons came into fashion, and dandies of the first water appeared in bright, snuff-coloured, pale green and blue coats, such as are now only worn by Paul Bedford or Keeley in a broad farce. In 1836, a cheap mode of gilding, smart for a day, dull and shabby in a week, completely destroyed the character of gilt buttons and brought up the Florentine again. The change was no doubt materially assisted and maintained by Bulwer's novel of Pelham, which set all young men dressing themselves up like crows with white shirts. In 1840, a deputation to Prince Albert attempted another revival of the gilt button trade, and at the same time the silk stocking weavers waited on the prince to endeavour to drive out the patent leather boots and bring in the low shoe. Both attempts failed. At present there are symptoms of a turn of fashion toward coloured coats and bright buttons, which may be successful, because the fashionable world abhors monotony. The flame-coloured coats, long curls, and pink under-waistcoats of George IV were succeeded by the solemn sables of an undertaker. The high tight stock made way for a sailor's neckcloth. For a time shawl waistcoats of gay colours had their hour. Then correct tight black yielded to the loosest and shaggiest garments that could be invented. Perhaps the year 1852 may see our youth arrayed in blue, purple, and pale brown. But a very little consideration will prove that these artificial changes, although they may benefit a class, are of little advantage to the community. If a man gives 10 shillings more for a coat with gilt buttons than for one with plain buttons, he has 10 shillings less to expend with some other tradesman. The Florentine button, first invented in 1820, and since much improved, is a very curious manufacture. It is made, as anyone may see, by cutting up a button of 5 pieces. First, the covering of Florentine or silk. Second, a cover of metal, which gives the shape to the button. Third, a small circle of millboard. Fourth, a circle of coarse cloth or calico. Fifth, a circle of metal, with a hole punched in the center, through which the calico or cloth is made to protrude, to form the shank, to be sewed onto the garment. Ranged in rows on either side of a long room of the button factory, says the correspondent of the Morning Chronicle, are from 50 to 100 girls and young women from the age of 14 to 4 or 5 and 20, all busily engaged, either at hand or steam presses, in punching out metal circles slightly larger than the size of the button, which is to be produced. Before each press the forewoman is seated, holding in her hand a sheet of zinc or iron about 2 feet long and 4 inches broad. This she passes rapidly under the press if worked by hand, and still more rapidly if worked by steam, punching and cutting at the rate of from 50 to 60 discs in a minute. As they are cut, they fall into a receptacle prepared to receive them. The perforated sheets are sold to the founder to be melted up and made into other sheets. In other rooms, younger women are engaged in cutting up Florentine cloth or other outside covering material, pasteboard and calico. Of these, a young woman can punch 57,000 a day, and of metal, 28,000 a day. The upper discs are submitted by another set of girls to presses from which each receives a blow that turns up an edge all round and reduces it to the exact size of the button. The lower disc is punched for the shank to come through, stamped with the maker's name or the name of the tailor for whom the buttons are made, and coated with varnish, either light or black. The 5 pieces then pass into a department where a woman superintends the labours of a number of children, from 7 to 10 years of age. These little creatures place all 5 pieces, one after another in regular order, in a small machine like a dice box, constructed to hold them, which is placed under a press, when a firm touch compresses the whole together in the neat form which anyone may examine on a black dress coat, without stitch or adhesive matter. This patent was the subject of long litigation between rival inventors, to the great benefit of the lawyers and loss of the industrious and ingenious. Within the last 12 months, Messrs. Chadbourne, button makers of Great Charles Street, have adapted this Florentine button to nails for furniture and carriages. The patent linen sewn through button is another recent invention, which has superseded the old wire button for undergarments, than which it is cheaper, neater, and more durable. It is composed of linen and circles of zinc. Horn buttons, with shanks, which are extensively used for cloth boots and sporting jackets, are made from the hoofs of horned cattle, which are boiled, cut, punched, dyed, stamped when soft, and polished by brushes moved by steam power, the chief part of the work being done by women and children. Pearl buttons have become an important part of the Birmingham manufactures, partly on the decline of metal buttons. They are extensively used on coats and waistcoats, where gilt buttons were formerly employed. The shell used in the manufacture of buttons, studs, card counters, etc. is the mother of pearl, the Concha margaritifera of naturalists. 5 kinds of shell are employed. First, the buffalo shell, so named because it arrived packed in buffalo skins. It comes chiefly from Panama, is the smallest and commonest, and sells to the trade at about £15 a ton. Second, the black Scotch from the Sandwich Islands, whence it is sent to Valparaiso and to Sidney, New South Wales, with from £15 to £30 a ton. The large outer rim is of a blackish or rather greenish tint, the centre only being white. The outer rim was formerly considered worthless, and large quantities were thrown away as rubbish. Change of fashion has brought the prismatic hues of the dark pearl into fashion for shooting coats, waistcoats, and even studs. It used to be a standing story with a Bristol barber that a square in that city had been built on thousands of pounds worth of tobacco stalks, thrown away as useless, until it was discovered that that part of the plant was capable of making a most saleable snuff. And so in Birmingham, the Irvingite Church on New Hall Hill is said to be built on hundreds of tons of refuse shell, which would now be worth from £15 to £20 per ton. The third shell is the Bombay or white Scotch, worth from £20 to £50 per ton. The fourth comes from Singapore and is brought here to exchange for British manufactures by the native craft which frequent that free port. It is a first-rate article, white to the edge, worth from £80 to £90 per ton. The fifth is the mother of pearl shell from Manila, of equal value and size, but with a slight yellow tinge around the edge. Pearl buttons are cut out and shaped by men with the lathe, polished by women with a grinding stone, and sorted and arranged on cards by girls. Glass buttons were formerly in use among canal boatmen, miners, and agricultural labourers in certain districts. They are now chiefly made for the African market. The process of making them and studs is well worth seeing. Beside the buttons already enumerated, they make in Birmingham the flat iron and brass buttons. For trousers, steel buttons. For ladies' dresses, wooden buttons. For overcoats, agate buttons, for which material is imported from Bohemia, and in fact every kind of button and stud, including papier-mâché. The manufacture of brass shanks is a separate trade, and the writer of the letters already quoted stated that the annual production at or upwards of 3 millions per working day. Of these, part are made by hand, but the greater number by a shank-making machine, wrought by steam power, and only requiring the attendance of one toolmaker. The machine feeds itself from a coil of brass or iron wire suspended from the roof and cuts and twists into shanks by one process at the rate of 360 per minute, or nearly 75 million per annum. Some button manufacturers employ one of these machines, the majority by the shanks. Guns and swords. According to Hutton, the historian of Birmingham, the town was indebted for its occupation in supplying our army with firearms to an ancestor of a gentleman who now represents a division of Warwickshire, a Sir Roger Newdigate, in the time of William III. The story, however, seems only half true. Hutton would imply that the first muskets manufactured in England were made in Birmingham. It seems more likely that the connection with William III arose from the desire of that monarch to have flintlock, which was superseding the matchlock on the continent, made in his own dominions. At any rate, the Revolution of 1688, which the romantic anti-commercial party of Young England so deeply regret, gave Birmingham its gun trade, as well as Hampton Court its asparagus beds. When Walpole gave us peace, the attention of the manufacturers was directed to fowling pieces, and from that time forward Birmingham has contained the greatest firearm factory in the world, although of course subject to many fluctuations. 20 years ago, a long war soon was as regular a toast at convivial meetings of Birmingham manufacturers as at any mess room or in any cockpit in Her Majesty's service. The government has made several attempts, by establishing manufactories with public money and under official control, to become independent of Birmingham, but the end has invariably been great and pitiful results in the number of arms produced. We hope to live to see the time when our navy will be built as economically as our guns are made, by private contract, and our public shipyards confined to the repairing department. During the war which ended at the Battle of Waterloo, the importance and prosperity of the gun makers were great. It was calculated that a gun a minute was made in Birmingham on the average of a year. But the peace threw numbers out of work and reduced wages very considerably. Time has brought the trade to a level. Indeed, it is one of the great advantages of Birmingham that the prosperity of the town does not rest on any one trade, so that if some are blighted, others are flourishing. When one fails, the workmen are absorbed into other parallel employments. The gun trade now depends for support on the demand for, first, cheap muskets for African and other Aboriginal tribes, secondly, on cheap fowling pieces, rifles, pistols, blunderbusses, etc., for exportation to America, Australia, and other countries where something effective is required at a moderate price. Thirdly, on the home demand for fowling pieces of all qualities, from the commonest to those sold at the West End of London at fancy prices. Fourthly, on that for firearms required by our army and navy. And lastly, on occasional uncertain orders created by wars and revolutions on the continent. There are a vast number of guns, or parts of guns, made in Birmingham, which bear the names of retailers in different parts of the kingdom. Even very fashionable gun makers find it worth their while to purchase goods in the rough state from Birmingham manufacturers, on whom they can depend, and finish them themselves. It is rendered easy by the system. No one in Birmingham makes the whole of a gun. The division of labor is very great. The makers of the lock, the barrel, and the stock are completely distinct, and the mechanics confine themselves to one branch of a department. The man who makes the springs for a lock has nothing to do with the man who makes the nipple or the hammer, while the barrel forger has no connection with the stockmaker or lockmaker. The visitor who has the necessary introductions should by no means omit to visit a gun barrel factory, as there are a good many picturesque effects in the various processes, besides the mechanical instruction it affords. The following is the order of the fabrication of a common gun. The sheets for barrels are made from scraps of steel and iron, such as old coach springs, knives, steel chairs, horseshoes and horseshoe nails, and sheets of waste steel from steel pen manufactories. These having been sorted, bound together, and submitted first to such a furnace, and then to such a steam hammer as we described in our visit to Wolverton, until it is shaped into a bar of tough iron, which is afterwards rolled into sheets of the requisite thickness. From one of the sheets, a length sufficient to make a gun barrel is cut off by a pair of steam-moved shears, of which the lower jaw is stationary, and the upper weighs a ton, of which plenty of examples may be seen in every steam engine factory. The slip of iron is made red hot, placed between a pair of rollers, one of which is convex and the other concave, and comes out in a semicircular trough shape, again heated and again pressed by smaller rollers, by which the cylinder is nearly completed. A long bar of iron is passed through the cylinder, and is thrust into the fire again, and when red hot it is submitted to the welder, who hammers it and heats it and hammers it again, until it assumes the form of a perfect tube. Damascus barrels are made by incorporating alternate layers of red-hot steel and iron, which are then twisted into the shape of a screw while at white heat. The bar thus made is twisted in a cold state by steam power around a bar into a barrel shape, then heated and welded together. These are the barrels which present the beautiful variegated appearance which gives them the name of Damascus. The barrels, whether common or twisted, are then bored by a steel rod, kept wet with water or oil and turned by steam. The process occupies from 2 to 3 hours for each barrel. The next operation is that of grinding the outside of the barrel with sandstone wheels, from 5 to 6 feet in diameter when new, driven by steam. These stones chiefly come from the neighboring district of Bilston. In 4 months' work, a stone of this size will be reduced to 2 feet. The employment is hard, dangerous from the stones often breaking while in motion, in which case pieces of stone weighing a ton have been known to fly through the roof of the shop. Unwholesome because sand and steel dust fill the eyes, mouth and lungs, unless a certain simple precaution is taken which grinders never take. After grinding, a nut is screwed into the breech, and the barrel is taken to the proof house to be proved. The proof house is a detached building, the interior of which is lined with plates of cast iron. The barrels are set in 2 iron stocks, the upper surface of one of which has a small gutter to contain a train of powder. In this train the barrels rest with their touch holes downwards, and in the rear of the breeches of the barrels is a mass of sand. When the guns, loaded with 5 times the quantity of power used in actual service, have been arranged, the iron-lined doors and windows are closed, and a train extending to the outside through a hole is fired. Some barrels burst and twist into all manner of shapes. Those which pass the ordeal are again examined after the lapse of 24 hours, and if approved, marked with 2 separate marks, one for viewing and one for proving. The mark for proving consists of 2 scepters crossed with a crown in the upper angle, the letters B and C in the left and right, and the letter P in the lower angle. For viewing only, V stands instead of P under the crown, the other letters omitted. After proving, the jiggerer fastens the pin which closes up the breech. In the meantime, the construction of the lock, which is an entirely different business, and carried on in the neighbouring towns of Wainsbury, Darlston and Wolverhampton, as well as in Birmingham, has been going on. The gun lock makers arranged into 2 great divisions of forgers and filers, beside many subdivisions. The forgers manufacture the pieces in the rough, the filers polish them and put them together. In the percussion lock there are 15 pieces, in the common flintlock 8. By a process patented about 11 years ago, parts of a gun lock formerly forged by hand are now stamped with a die. The use of this invention was opposed by the men, but without success. The barrel and lock next pass into the hands of the stocker. The stocks, of breechwood for common guns, of walnut for superior, of which much is imported from France and Italy, arrive in Birmingham in a rough state. The stocker cuts away enough of the stock to receive the barrel, the lock, the ramrod, and shapes it a little. The next workman employed is the screw together. He screws on the heel plate, the guard that protects the trigger, and puts in the trigger plate, lets in the pipes to hold the ramrod, and puts on the nozzle cap and all other mountings. After this, a finisher takes the gun to pieces and polishes, fits all the mountings, or sends them to be polished by women. The clock is sent to the engraver to have an elephant and the word warranted, if for the African market, put on it, a crown and the words tower-proof, if for our military service. While the stock is in the hands of the maker-off and cleanser, it is carved, polished, and if needful, stained. Common gun barrels are polished or browned to prevent them from rusting. Real Damascus barrels are subjected to a chemical process which brings out the fine wavy lines and prevents them from rusting. All these operations having been performed, the barrel, the lock, and the stock are brought back by the respective workmen who have given them the final touch, and put together by the finisher or gunmaker. And this putting together is as much as many eminent gunmakers ever do. But by care and good judgment, they acquire a reputation for which they can charge a handsome percentage. For these reasons, with local knowledge, it is possible to obtain from a Birmingham finisher who keeps no shop a first-rate double gun at a very low figure compared with retail prices. Belgium and Germany compete with Birmingham for cheap African guns, and even forge the proof marks. Neither in quality nor in price for its first-rate articles can any country compete with us. Swords and matchets. The sword trade of Birmingham is trifling compared with that in guns. The foreign demand has dwindled away until it has become quite insignificant, and the chief employment is afforded by our own army and navy. Nevertheless, good swords are made in Birmingham, which is the only town in England where any manufacture of the kind exists, although the blades often bear the names of more fashionable localities. It is among the traditions of the Birmingham trade that in 1817, when our government was about to transfer its orders for swords to Germany, in consequence of the inferiority of English swords, a Mr. Gill claimed to compete for the contract, and that in order to show what he could do, he appeared before the Board of Ordnance with a sword which he had tied round his thigh, and then untied, when it immediately became straight. In the end, Mr. Gill was the means of retaining the sword trade in Birmingham. Sword grinding is worth seeing. Sword makers find their principal employment in producing matchets, a tool or weapon very much like the modern regulation cutlass, but stronger and heavier, with a plain beechwood handle, worth wholesale from 6 pence to 9 pence each. They are used in the East and West Indies, Ceylon, and South America for cutting down sugar canes and similar uses. We take the name to be Spanish. It is used by Defoe and Dampier. We only mention the article as one of the many odd manufactures made, but never sold retail in England. Steel pens. All the steel pens made in England, and a great many sold in France, Germany, and America, whatever names or devices they may bear, are manufactured in Birmingham. In this respect, as in many others of the same nature, the Birmingham manufacturers are very accommodating, and quite prepared to stamp on their production of the American Eagle, the Cap of Liberty, the effigy of Pio Nono, or the Comte de Chambord, if they get the order, the cash, or a good credit. And they were very right. Their business is to supply the article. The sentiment is merely a matter of taste. There are 18 steel pen manufacturers in the Birmingham directory, and 8 penhold makers. 2 manufacturers employ about 1,000 hands, and the other 17 about as many more. We can most of us remember when a long hard steel pen, which required the nicest management to make it right, cost £1, and was used more as a curiosity than as a useful, comfortable instrument. At about 1820 or 1821, the first gross of 3-slit pens was sold wholesale at £7 4 shillings, the gross of 12 dozen, A better article is now sold at 7p a gross. The cheapest pens are now sold wholesale at 2p a gross, the best at from 3 shillings 6p to 5 shillings. And it has been calculated that Birmingham produces no less than 1,000 million steel pens every year. America is the best foreign customer, in spite of a duty of 24%. France ranks next, for the French pens are bad and dear. Mr. Gillett, who is one of the very first in the steel pen trade, rose by his own mechanical talents and prudent industry from a very humble station. He was, we believe, a working mechanic, and invented the first machine for making steel pens, which for a long period he worked with his own hands. He makes a noble use of the wealth he has acquired. His manufactory is in every respect a model for imitation of his townsmen, as we shall show when we say a few words about the condition of the working population. A liberal patron of our best modern artists, he has made a collection of their works, which is open to the inspection of any respectable stranger. The following description of his manufactory, which is not open to strangers without a special cause shown, will be found interesting in a social, as well as a commercial and mechanical point of view. Okay, it seems that the description of Mr. Gillett's steel pen factory is quite long, so I'm going to call it there. We'll pick it up there in a few months. As always, if you'd like to carry on from where I'm leaving off, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.